In 1917, Congressman Andrew Volstead made a proposal to the U.S. Congress prohibiting the manufacturing, sale, and distribution of alcoholic beverages, resulting in the 18th Amendment to the Constitution, creating unprecedented conflict in America over drinking alcohol. After years of organized crime and lack of necessary enforcement, Congress finally compromised and adopted the 21st Amendment, which repealed Prohibition. The first idea of prohibition was in the 1820s and 30s. In 1838, Massachusetts passed a law that banned the sale of alcohol in less than 15-gallon quantities. In 1846, Maine passed the first prohibition law. By 1855, 13 states enacted prohibition in their legislature. Several other states followed by the time of the Civil War began in 1861. In 1881, Kansas was the first state to have prohibition in the state constitution. In 1893, the Anti-Saloon League was formed. During Prohibition, alcohol was considered a destructive force in families and relationships. Most business owners supported Prohibition so the workers would be more efficient so they could increase working hours to increase production. When the U.S. joined World War I, President Woodrow Wilson set a temporary prohibition to save grain for more food production for the war effort. That year, Congress submitted the 18th Amendment, which banned the manufacture, transportation, and sale of alcohol. That submission was ratified January 29, 1919, by 36 states and went into effect on the federal level. In October 1919, Congress passed the National Prohibition Act. On March 23, 1933, Franklin D. Roosevelt signs the Cullen-Harrison Act, which legalizes the manufacture, sale, and sale of certain alcohol. On December 5, 1933, Prohibition was repealed by the 21st Amendment. The Prohibition era encouraged criminal activity associated with bootlegging. The most well-known person was Al Capone, who earned $60 million from bootlegging operations. One of the most infamous gang rivalries associated with bootlegging was the St. Valentine's Massacre, which took place in Chicago in 1929, in which several men dressed up as policemen believed to have been associated with Capone shot and killed a group of men in the enemy gang. The Anti-Saloon League, or ASL, was a nonpartisan organization established in 1893 that focused on the single issue of prohibition. From 1948 to 1950, it was known as the Temperance League. From 1950 to 1964, it was called the National Temperance League. Since that time, it has been known as the American Council on Alcohol Problems. The Association Against the Prohibition League, AAPA, was established in 1819 and became a leading organization working for the repeal of prohibition. Prohibition dates back to the 1840s when a lot of immigrants from Ireland and Germany immigrated to America. As more immigrants came in, the crime rates began increasing and fights took place regularly. Many temperance and anti-alcohol organizations blame these injustice acts upon the consumption of alcohol. In the past crime, alcohol was associated with it, and in many places it was believed that alcohol was the main source of evil power, creating pauperism, crime, madness, and death. People for prohibition wanted alcohol destroyed at once. However, anti-prohibitionists thought prohibition would be a violation of their rights given to them by the Constitution. One of the major issues leading up to prohibition was World War I. Because World War grain was used to make alcohol and it should have been used making food for soldiers, there was a concern about the conservation of resources, which was linked to a progressive movement. A reform era which was the government reforming society and politics. Prohibition accumulated in 1918, and the Wartime Prohibition Act was passed to save grain for the war effort during World War I. A lot of temperance and anti-alcohol propaganda were used in newspapers, and as an appeal to public order to save grain for the war effort. According to the newspaper, the Alabama Citizen, 39 million bushels of grain were used in milking spirits, and 68 million bushels of grain were used in malt liquors in 1916. The proportion and total production of rice, it would have supported the energy requirement of 200,000 men a year. Senator Lodge said that 2 million bushels and 13 million baskets of corn were used in beer. The Prohibition era was mostly gangsters, bootleggers, speakeasies, and rum runners that ended up in a chaotic situation in respect to the social network of America. It began in 1920 and ended in 1933. Prohibition was enforced with the 18th Amendment, but was repealed with the 21st Amendment. The most illegal alcohol trafficking was through gangs and other organized crime. Chicago was one of the most notorious cities. At the beginning of Prohibition, the outfit organized all the local Chicago gangs. They split the city and suburbs into areas to be controlled by various gangs. Each handled the liquor sales in their district. Underground breweries and distilleries were hidden throughout the city. Beer could easily be provided for the demand in the city. The outfit would sell lower gangs alcohol at wholesale prices, even though agreements were supposed to be set in stone. Corruption was spreading quickly, and they were not able to settle conflicts in court, and they usually resorted to violence. Al Capone was assumed control of the outfit in 1925, which was the same year some of the bloodiest gang wars ever happened. Prohibition was supposed to stop beer production. It actually increased the hard liquor consumption. Prohibition was never popular among Americans. Some of the people that were pro-prohibition were factory owners. Prohibition was a nightmare. Many officials themselves were corrupt. Liquor sales from mobsters funded their crime syndicates. Prohibition failed because few reasons: lacking of funding and prohibition agents, many who were fired for corruption, lack of prohibition agents, the thirst for alcohol, the power of mobsters. Alcoholism wasn't a real problem until whiskey became more popular. Husbands would come home from a long day's work with whiskey by the door. They would have a glass or two of whiskey and become drunk. When husbands came home and had beer by the door, it wasn't much of a problem, because beer has a 3 to 5% alcohol, while whiskey has 7 to 9% ratio of alcohol. Prohibition brought many arguments and protests between two groups: the wets, who were against prohibition, and the dries, who were for prohibition. When the 21st Amendment repealing prohibition passed, the wets were out celebrating while the dries were sad and miserable. The end of prohibition was brought against because the government was upset about the Great Depression, and they figured out people were buying alcohol illegally. They might as well legalize it and tax it. The short-term impacts of Prohibition were the Volstead Act, National Prohibition Party, Prohibition Damaged Society, the Women's Christian Temperance Movement, and the social reform. Alcohol was able to be consumed under a certain percentage of proof. Low morals, rum runners, bootleggers, illegal sale of hard liquors, liquor production, and alcohol was cheaply made and made it more dangerous. If you were caught with alcohol by police, you'd have to pour it out in front of them and go to court. And there are a lot of prohibition cases. Long-term impacts of prohibition were it kept the country strong and patriotic, kept people in check with their religion, people became less abusive and destructive when drinking, and people became more responsible. Women were not abused, sexually mistreated. The Anti-Saloon League, there were campaigns against prohibition. They tried to abandon alcohol. It angered people because they thought they lost some of their rights. It created a new market: National Commission of Law, Observance and Enforcement, black market, gangsters, and mobsters. In conclusion, prohibition came about to be the societal conflicts of men consuming too much alcohol. It became known that whiskey had more alcohol content than beer. In the end, Congress finally compromised and passed the 21st Amendment, which repealed the 18th Amendment.